Hey everybody, it's Drew from 198 Methods. Happy New Year, just about. Doing a quick video walkthrough of our annual charts and graphs post because it's got some good specific information about where we think we're at as a climate movement here at the end of the year in 2024. And our most fervent hope is that it sets you up not just to want to make a year-end donation. That's great if you do, but really what we need is people ready to take action. We're also endorsing this lovely new book from our friend Ira. Oop, doesn't show up unless I put it in front of myself here, called Panic Now, which talks about the linked catastrophes of climate change, capitalism, and colonialism. Cacao, as he calls it. And so, encouraging folks to read that for the new year as well, to get in the sort of mindset that we're looking for, talking about the risks of 2025 and what's at stake, where we're at. So, without further ado, we'll just jump in and run through the slides here. There we go. First thing, a lot of our slides, as usual, a lot of our charts and graphs deal with annual emissions of global warming pollution, climate change emissions, and how we're doing with reducing those emissions or not, and the impacts on global temperature and climate chaos. And so we always put this context in from the start of his administration. President Biden has been promising to cut global warming pollution from the US in half, reduce it by 50% by 2030, and then to net zero by 2050. So when we talk about the promises America has made under the Paris Climate Agreement, these are the promises that we're talking about. That's the number that we have committed to publicly several different times. And that's the yardstick essentially that we're comparing against for, are we doing what we said we would do? Are we doing enough? Is it having the desired impact on the climate and economy? So first answer to that question, there's two charts in here, both from the same Climate Action Tracker does an annual report right around the annual climate talk. So this one came out in November of 2024. And it was based on the policies, actions, targets, commitments, et cetera, that the Biden administration had made up to that point, up to November 2024. As we'll talk about, there's been even some more recent breaking news on terms of what the Biden administration is able to do or promise or commit to in terms of action. But this is the sort of starting point where we were with the outgoing administration. We'll talk about the incoming Trump administration in just a minute. But this is what has been done and committed to. The good news here, this is in terms of where we need to go. So the little green bar here at the bottom is under the Paris Climate Agreement. What every nation on Earth committed to was holding global temperature rise well below 2 degrees centigrade, about 4 degrees Fahrenheit. And that was generally interpreted to mean about 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. We're nearly there already in terms of total global heating that's already occurred, is already locked in. And the existing Biden targets, pledges, et cetera, do not get us quite all the way to that goal, though they are making progress in the right direction. The way to read this is going from blue down to gray. The blue and purple bars there are based on policies the Biden administration has put into place or pledges and targets that they've made through 2030. So things that are reasonably expected to either already have happened or the change has already been made, at least in law, though actually getting the technologies rolled out, as we'll talk about, is a different matter. So if we did just the stuff that Biden has already done or already promised to do in some fashion, that'll get you somewhere around 2.5 C warming, which is down from 4C or above, which is what would happen if we did nothing at all, but obviously not to the 1.5 goal. If you factor in somewhat more optimistic pledges and targets, this is a lot of the stuff is like these net zero by 2050 pledges. A lot of banks and corporations and big institutions, including the US federal government, have promised to be net zero by 2050. If we take them at their word that they'll figure out how to do that sometime between now and 2050, that'll get you down more in the 2C range. But it requires a certain amount of optimism that things will just work out well. And then mostly what it does is you have to trust them that they're going to get there even though they're not on track to do that. They're not taking the actions in 2020 to 2030, excuse me, to make that happen. Um, so here is a little bit more intelligible as we usually look at it. This is the actual emissions and then what that's projected to do to global temperature. So looking at this chart over on the left side of my screen, the policies in action so far are insufficient to meet the goals of a 1.5 C planet by the 2030s. It doesn't put us on that pathway. But importantly, emissions are going down. 2023 emissions actually went down in the US for the first time since the pandemic. They went down in the pandemic, obviously, because a lot of stuff shut down. So we just weren't manufacturing very much. People weren't driving or traveling very much. That greatly reduced emissions. And it was the only time in the last 20, 30 years where we've reduced emissions like on the pace that we needed to, but it took an entire shutdown of the global economy to get us there. Obviously, what we want to do is reduce emissions that fast, but without requiring everybody to stay home or not travel or not go to work. And earn income and be useful, productive members of society living their lives. And so, what we saw this year for the first time, and it's projected to continue for the next couple of years through 2030, is that we will have some continued emissions reduction going forward, which is great. It's not yet enough reductions, and it's not yet fast enough to put us on the path towards that 1.5 goal that was in the Paris Climate Agreement. We'll come back to this a couple times about how and why, but we're generally trending downward, but in the direction of a 2 to 3 degrees centigrade global climate temperature rise by the end of the century. And we're not yet in that kind of yellow green zone where we want to be, which is to say we're either almost sufficient or all the way to compatible with a 1.5 C goal. There's a different report from Rhodium Group, which has done a bunch of different modeling about Biden's climate policies, in particular the Inflation Reduction Act. They're usually pretty, what we would say is optimistic. What they're doing is they're looking at, if you offer a tax incentive for people to buy electric cars, how many people do we think will buy electric cars next year? They tend to be somewhat rosy in their projections on those things. But it is real modeling and is based on real data and economic forecasts and that kind of stuff. And so, it's a optimistic projection perhaps, but it is a realistically optimistic projection, and that's why a lot of people refer to them. We can see again, remember, think back to the first slide. The goal is 50% reduction by 2030. And so the blue bars here, which is the current policy, shows that if we did nothing, if we just left the Biden administration policies in place, the Inflation Reduction Act, bipartisan infrastructure law, all of the government policies where individual government agencies like Department of Energy and EPA and transportation are all working to reduce their emissions down to net zero by 2050. If all that stuff just stayed the same, and we hadn't had a change in presidential administration, for example, where that would get us is not quite to the 50% by 2030 goal, but it would get close. It would get around 50% by 2035. So that's the not fast enough. Would get us there about 5 years too late, probably. And then not quite enough is by 2030, we'd be more in the 30 to 40% range, which again, good, but not quite what we had promised or need to do. And then, of course, the real elephant in the room is that President Biden is not going to be the president anymore in about a month. On January 20th, 2025, Donald Trump will take over again. He certainly has said he wants to, and we all assume that he will try to roll back and repeal various climate policies from the Biden administration. Now, we also know that Trump is not all powerful. We saw during his first term in office, we were able to mess up a lot of his policy, especially his climate and fossil fuel policy, getting his various nominees, secretaries of energy, secretaries of interior, DOE, Interior, and EPA being three agencies that deal a lot with climate and energy policy. We got the heads of all three of those agencies variously fired over their tenures, and they had to be replaced even within the first term of Trump. So that's the kind of stuff that, again, you can imagine if you're trying to roll back all these Biden policies, all this stuff is already happening. That we can make their lives difficult and prevent them from rolling back or outright repealing the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law and all those kind of things will take an act of Congress. They would have to rewrite the laws that they had written back in 2022. And as we've seen recently with the near government shutdown debate in December, they're going to have a very small margin in the House of Representatives. In particular, it's a very closely divided body. The Republican majority there may only be one seat for parts of December and January because some folks who won re-election in the November election are being appointed to various positions in the Trump administration. That means that seat will be vacant for at least a minute until somebody can be appointed to fill it, et cetera. So with Republicans down to this very narrow majority, maybe as small as one seat at times, they're going to have a hard time passing big legislation. They historically did not pass a lot of legislation during Trump's first term, just the one big tax cut bill. Now, a lot of the way that the Inflation Reduction Act worked was also essentially a tax cut bill. It was just tax cuts for clean energy and not for fossil fuels, or tax cuts for clean energy and fossil fuels, oftentimes. So they could repeal a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act through a tax bill, but they may not be able to do that. And certainly we can make it harder for them to do that. So what you're seeing here with the yellow and red bars is Rhodium Group kind of projecting what things are they most likely to be able to roll back or repeal, and what things, how that might impact emissions. And the best news part of this is kind of no matter what Trump does, emissions will go down some from where they have been historically. And that's because we've already done some stuff. Coal is already being replaced by renewable energy. They're not going to uninstall a solar farm or a wind farm that got built in the last few years. And they're very unlikely to turn back on a coal-fired power plant, for example. Therefore, a lot of the emissions reductions that we've achieved in the last 4 years are probably here to stay, but not all of them necessarily are here to stay. And so what you see here in this range is if Trump is successful at rolling back or repealing parts of Biden's climate legacy, that will reduce the amount of emissions, and it will probably reduce it down to something in the 20 to 30% range from the 30 to 50% range. And so it'll knock 10% off of that. And remember, we already weren't on track to like meet our climate goals. We were not doing enough as it was. Now we're going to do even less. The how much less we do is up to us and up to Trump and how we work the political scenario in the next few years. This is a big slide about a lot. We've talked a lot about the success of the Biden administration replacing coal with renewable energy and really boosting renewable energy deployment, as well as things that run on renewable energy like electric cars or heat pumps. There's a benefit to them, not just because you're moving from a gasoline or a heating oil based heating system or transportation system to an electric one, but then to the extent that that electric grid now runs on renewable energy, that's where you're getting big decarbonization gains. And you see that especially in states like California, where they've had good adoption of electric vehicles. They also have a lot of solar and renewable energy online. And that means California, as an example of a state, has been able to reduce emissions pretty substantially over the last couple of years. We need more states to do that, and we need more of that stuff. And the big fly in the ointment with the Biden administration and with the Obama administration previously has always been natural gas or fossil gas. What we're really doing is not replacing coal with renewables. We're replacing coal with natural gas, and then we're adding more and more renewables to the grid, which is good. But natural gas has been growing much faster than renewables. It's been growing much faster than coal is declining. And especially with some things like the new need for more data centers and artificial intelligence, meaning that we need to produce more electricity to satisfy the demand for those things. That has been pushing gas use up even higher. The other big thing that doesn't factor into the U.S. emissions charts, if you go back a couple of slides, not reflected in these are fossil fuels that we export that are burned elsewhere in the world. And we export a huge and growing amount of both oil and gas. We still export a bit of coal, though that's, again, not the biggest problem going forward. The big problem is especially gas, or LNG, liquefied natural gas exports are a huge thing. They don't show up in the reporting here because this is US based climate emissions and our US goals for it. Because it's somebody else's problem when you put it on the tanker. But we've shown repeatedly throughout this year that, one, there are huge leaks in the LNG export process, which means we do contribute a ton more methane, which is a greenhouse gas, to the atmosphere by having a big LNG export industry. And then on top of that, you've really got this industry that, just because we don't report it on our national determined contribution form doesn't mean that the gas isn't getting burned elsewhere and isn't displacing renewable energy. And the good news about that is we finally, at the end of this year in December, got that report from the US Department of Energy, which said finally and conclusively what we've known all along and been saying all along, which is that exporting natural gas is bad for American consumers. It's bad for America's climate goals because of all the leaks and excess gas in the process. And then it's bad for global climate goals because it tends to displace renewable energy adoption, not other kinds of fossil fuels. And so, to the extent that we are exporting more, I believe the phrase that Secretary Granholm used in describing it was that it was untenable and unadvisable for us to continue exporting natural gas from a climate perspective and also from a consumer perspective. So, good that we finally got that admission from the Biden administration. Bad that it happened so late in the Biden, they took so long to produce that report and come to that conclusion that now they are almost unable to implement those findings. There is still time, if they want to, for them to deny a bunch of pending permits for things like CP2, Calcasieu Pass 2, which is a big gas export terminal in Louisiana that's proposed. It's a new terminal, and we've been trying to get DOE and FERC and other agencies to reject the permits for that on this logic that exporting natural gas is not good for the climate or for American consumers. Now we've got a DOE report that says that exact same thing. They could decide to reject the permits based on that, but we think they're unlikely to do so, or at least unlikely to do so without a big push from the public. And so that's why we've been encouraging you to send that email to President Biden and his Department of Energy. And you can find the link to do that in the blog post that goes with this. So, bad news. We're sort of ending. The reason why we're plugging this book called Panic Now, and why we keep saying we're encouraging you to panic in this moment, is that we really, I mean, it was true before December of 2024, but it is really incontrovertibly true that 1.5C pathway is no longer possible. We are not going to get there. To get there, what we would have needed to do was have someone like a Biden administration not only continue what they were doing, but actually expand and accelerate the action that the US was taking. And we would need that same kind of action around the world. And we're now at a point halfway through the decade that is pivotal for climate action. We're not getting that. You're not going to get another Biden administration. You're not going to get anybody in the presidential administration who will continue that work. There will be versions of that. Doesn't mean that's game over for the climate or that we should all just give up. There are lots of things we can and must do, including some at the state and local level, including actions that we can take through the federal government that will make this better. But getting to that 1.5C planet containing climate change to about as bad as it is right now is not going to happen. Where we're more plausibly on the pathway for is between 2 and 4 degrees centigrade of warming. And what you're basically seeing here is the high end of, if we keep doing what we're doing, gets us the first degree, right? That'll get you in the 2.5 to 2.9 C range. That's about 1 more degree Celsius of warming than what we already have. And that's if we kept all those policies in place. Again, we don't expect the Trump administration to try and keep all of those in place. And then if we somehow follow on, if we come out of 2025 and 2030 with better and bolder climate actions after that, the second half of the century, 2035 to say 2080, that's where you could get more of this action that would bring us down to more like 1.9 or 2.1C, right? So that's what you're seeing in this graph, is the range of what's possible, what's imaginable, is really more between 2C and 3C if we take action. If we do nothing at all, or if Trump is phenomenally successful, not just in rolling back Biden's climate administration policies, but in enacting new and more pro-fossil fuel policies. For example, if the route is more total, or if he finds a way to throw out the US Constitution and the rules of elections and serve another 2 or 3 or 4 terms beyond 2024, when his current term starts, then you would start to see, pushing up higher beyond this stuff. And of course, temperatures will keep rising if they're still going up by 2100, if we haven't bent the curve down so that the temperature is leveling off at 2.1 C higher or something like that, then the temperatures will keep going up beyond that and it will get even hotter. And as we keep saying, or as we've always said, the reason why we talk about this stuff and why we talk about 1.5 versus 2C and why it's important that half a degree of warming over a century is if you think about the last year, what we're really saying is that every year for the next 100-ish years is going to be like the one we just had, which is to say there will be multiple climate-fueled superstorms that will kill thousands of people around the world, displace tens of thousands or millions of people, depending on the size of the disaster, and that those impacts will be felt here in America as well as around the world. You think about the big storms we saw that flooded parts of Western North Carolina or devastated parts of Florida. You think about the big fires we've seen in Hawaii and in California in just in Canada in just the last year or two. Those are all the kind of things that will keep happening every year, year after year, as long as we're all alive. And that's already what's happening at 1.5. It's going to get a little bit worse, at least. It may get a lot worse. And what we're trying to do is contain the lot worse to just be a little bit worse or about the same. And that is panic inducing. It's very depressing. It's very disheartening to sit with that idea that things are not going to get better. They're going to get worse. And the best thing we could say about it is that everything is going to fall apart and collapse, and that we get to decide how we want to rebuild. Um, and that's why we said the last and sort of most depressing or expressive of what happened in 2024 is still the election results. That even with all of that said, we spent a huge amount of time this year arguing that Trump should not be allowed to be on the ballot based on the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution that disbars people who've engaged in insurrection from running for higher office. We were unsuccessful in that. We argued that no corporation or investor should put money into new fossil fuel infrastructure from this point forward. We were mostly unsuccessful in that. And in fact, they raised so much money that they were able to be one of the biggest financiers of the US election, and they got the exact result that they wanted. They, being the fossil fuel industry, raised record money, spent record money on the election, got the result that they wanted. They bought this election. And they got what they wanted for the price that they wanted. And there's no sign that that would stop happening. In a capitalist economy, people who have the money have the power. And we were unsuccessful in breaking the link between carbon and capital this year and in the last couple of years. That's a lofty or ambitious goal to talk about ending capitalism or the connection between capitalism and carbon. But I mean, that really was why we did the Summer of Heat protests the way that we did them, with consistent action at Citibank and New York-based financiers of climate chaos, week after week, month after month, for a long time. Hundreds of people getting arrested, taking nonviolent direct action. That was the point of that campaign. And it didn't work in the sense that we were unsuccessful in moving that money or creating a division between capital and carbon. And we see that in the election results as clearly as anywhere else. So we're asking you, encouraging you to sit with your feeling of panic. If you are in a position to make a year-end donation, of course, you are welcome to do that. And we will put it right to work with some early actions in January, pressuring Biden's DOE before he leaves office to take action on that LNG report, for example. We're also talking today about a new project with some friends of ours in DC called the DC Unwelcoming Committee. We're putting up anti-fossil fuel and anti-fascist artwork all over the district right before the inauguration. And so the other thing we would say is, especially this year, especially at the end of this very long and taxing and trying and defeating kind of year, if you have money and you want to share it, great. But if you have time, or if you are feeling alarmed by all the data in the slides just there, even better than money is to commit to action. Stay on the email list, look for opportunities like the Unwelcoming Committee. You can submit art to the project wherever you live. You can also offer to put up art in your city or town wherever you live. You don't have to come to DC. We want to make a showing of art in DC that is unwelcoming to fascists and fossil fuels in time for the inauguration. That's a specific project with a specific focus. But you can use that artwork anytime and any place that you feel called to. And that's the kind of action that we need more of. Because, as we said a couple times there, we were unsuccessful in 2024 in breaking either fossil fuels, fascism, capitalism, or the linkages between fossil fuels, fascism, and capital. And so we need more and more radical kinds of direct action next year. We need you and other people to take those actions with us. And so if you've got money to share at the end of the year, great. But if you don't worry about that. Do worry about getting yourself and your family and your community and your spirit into the place where you're ready to take action next year, because that's what we really need the most, more than we need $1.98 or $19.80 or whatever the average donation ends up being this week. We need you ready to go and take action. So join the Unwelcoming Committee in DC or submit art from wherever you are if you want to be part of that. Get ready for more and more radical stuff in 2025. And from all of us at 198 Methods, Happy New Year.